Close your eyes and imagine the absolute terror of the open sea 4,500 years ago. You are standing on the deck of a vessel that has no iron in its construction. There are no steel nails, no bronze bolts, no waterproof epoxy. The hull beneath your bare feet is made of thick planks of Indian teak or wild acacia, stitched together with hand-twisted cords of coconut fiber and date palm fronds. The seams are caulked with animal fat, crushed reeds, and sticky black bitumen boiled down from natural petroleum seeps along the Euphrates River. Beneath your feet, resting in the pitch-black hold, is 3 tons of raw, unrefined copper ingots. Copper is nearly 9 times denser than water. If a sudden squall hits, if a rogue wave fractures one of the stitched fiber seams along the keel, that dead weight of metal will not let you float. It will drag your vessel down into the abyssal depths of the Arabian Sea in 90 seconds. You have no magnetic compass. The compass will not be invented for another 3,000 years. You have no paper charts. You have no sextant. You have no radio to call for help. To your left is the infinite, empty horizon of the Indian Ocean, a watery void stretching thousands of miles south to Antarctica. To your right is the jagged, sun-bleached coastline of the Arabian Peninsula, a wasteland of salt flats and red volcanic mountains, where there is no fresh water for 300 miles. If the wind dies, you bake to death under a merciless sun that reaches 120 degrees Fahrenheit. If the wind blows too hard, you are smashed against razor-sharp coral reefs. And yet, you are here. You are hundreds of miles from home, riding the seasonal monsoon winds across a watery desert. Think about the daily sensory reality of survival on board a Bronze Age merchant vessel in the middle of the Arabian Sea. You have no cabins. You have no bunks. You sleep on top of coarse reed mats laid directly across the cargo bales of barley and wool, or on the hard, unyielding surfaces of copper bun ingots. Your fresh water is stored in sewn goatskin bladders hung from the wooden mast. In the sweltering tropical heat, the water becomes tepid, tasting strongly of goat leather, rancid animal fat, and pine pitch. Every sailor is rationed to a single ceramic cup of water at sunrise and another at sunset. Your food is simple, dry, and monotonous. Dried dates from the orchards of Uar, cakes of hard unleavened barley bread, dried mutton cured in salt, and strips of sun-dried fish caught trailing bone hooks from the stern. And the sea was not merely a physical hazard. It was a mythological nightmare populated by terrifying cosmic monsters. In the religious worldview of ancient Sumer, the open ocean was the domain of Abzu, the primordial freshwater abyss, and Tiamat, the monstrous goddess of the chaotic salt sea. To sail past the safety of the river mouth was to venture into the untamed realm of chaos demons. The Kurr, the cosmic dragon of the underworld, and the 7 evil spirits of the tempest. Every time a captain raised his linen sail, he performed animal sacrifices on the prow, pouring libations of sweet beer, cedar oil, and honey into the waves to appease Enki, the god of water and wisdom, and Utu, the sun god who illuminates the path across the watery desert. Why? Because a king sitting on an ivory throne in a mud-brick palace in Mesopotamia, 1,000 miles to the north, needs weapons to conquer his neighbors. Because a high priestess in the city of Uar needs carnelian beads to adorn the sacred statue of the moon god Nana. because human ambition has outgrown the physical capacity of the dry land, and humanity has decided to stake its survival on the waves. You are listening to The Grand Narrative. I am your host, and this is Season 1, The First Networks. In Episode 1, we walk the ancient obsidian trails, tracing how our Stone Age ancestors carried small parcels of volcanic glass across mountain ranges on foot. But as human society evolved, our appetite for materials underwent a staggering transformation. We stopped living in temporary shelters of brush and bone. We began building monumental cities of brick and stone. And cities do not run on obsidian. Cities run on heavy industry. They run on timber, stone, and above all, metal. Today, in Episode 2, we leave the dirt paths behind and plunge into the birth of maritime commerce. We will uncover the lost civilizations of the Persian Gulf, explore the mysterious copper kingdom of Magan, and board the forgotten ghost ships that created the world's first intercontinental ocean supply chain. To understand why humans were willing to risk their lives on fragile wooden boats in 2500 BC, you must understand the strange, paradoxical geography of Mesopotamia. The word Mesopotamia literally means the land between the rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates, flowing through modern-day Iraq, eastern Syria, and southeastern Turkey. In the 5th and 4th millennia BC, the southern portion of this region, known as Sumer, became the cradle of urban civilization. The soil of the Sumerian floodplains was extraordinarily fertile. Silt deposited by the annual river floods created agricultural yields that were unheard of anywhere else on the planet. A single farmer could produce enough barley, wheat, dates, and sesame oil to feed 20 people. Consider the sheer demographic and caloric engine that powered this Mesopotamian expansion. In the alluvial plains of Sumer, the development of the cedar plow around 3000 BC revolutionized agriculture. Unlike broadcast seeding, where grain was scattered haphazardly by hand across the soil and eaten by birds, the Sumerian cedar plow dropped individual barley seeds down a wooden funnel directly into the furrow behind the bronze-tipped plowshare at precise mathematical intervals. This single agricultural innovation doubled crop yields and reduced seed waste by 70%. The resulting mountain of barley, preserved in dry temple silos, was the capital surplus that funded the construction of ocean-going fleets and subsidized the high-risk maritime expeditions sent into the uncharted waters of the Persian Gulf. To preserve tens of thousands of tons of harvested grain in the humid floodplains of southern Mesopotamia, Sumerian temple architects engineered monumental storage facilities that were marvels of environmental control. The grain silos were constructed with double-thick exterior mud brick walls separated by narrow air cavities that insulated the grain from the blistering desert heat. The floors were raised on ceramic plinths and lined with thick layers of dried reed mats soaked in boiling bitumen, preventing groundwater moisture from seeping upward and preventing burrowing rodents from contaminating the stores. Inside these sealed chambers, the grain remained cool, dry, and edible for up to 5 years, creating a strategic national food reserve that protected the urban population from catastrophic river droughts, while providing the portable caloric capital needed to finance overseas naval fleets. That colossal food surplus allowed humanity to do something completely new. It allowed people to stop farming. It created specialized labor. For the first time in history, you had full-time scribes, full-time metalworkers, full-time soldiers, full-time architects, bureaucrats, priests, and kings. Cities like Uruk, Eridu, and Lagash exploded into existence, housing tens of thousands of citizens behind towering defensive walls of sun-dried mud brick. These cities invented writing, cuneiform script pressed into wet clay tablets with reed styluses. They invented the 60-minute hour and the 360-degree circle. They invented complex legal contracts, taxation systems, and astronomical calendars. They were the most advanced, sophisticated, and wealthy human societies on Earth. And yet, geographically speaking, southern Mesopotamia was an absolute industrial prison. Look at the natural resources of the Sumerian plain. What do you have? You have mud. You have reeds. You have water. And you have agricultural produce, grain, wool, leather, and bitumen. That is it. In the entire southern half of Iraq, there is not a single outcropping of hard building stone. There are no forests of hardwood timber to roof monumental temples or build city gates. And most critically of all, there is not a single gram of metal ore in the soil. No gold, no silver, no lead, no tin, and no copper. Think about the sheer vulnerability of that situation. You are building the first great civilizations in human history, but you are completely dependent on materials that exist hundreds, or thousands, of miles beyond your borders. If you want to build a palace for your king, you need cedar beams from the mountains of Lebanon. If you want to carve statues of your gods, you need diorite from the Persian Gulf. If you want to equip your army with bronze spears, bronze helmets, and bronze-tipped arrows to defend your grain stores from barbarian raiders, you need copper and tin. How do you get those materials to the alluvial plains of Sumer? During the early centuries, the Mesopotamians tried overland trade. They sent donkey caravans across the northern mountains and the western deserts. A donkey is a remarkable animal, but a single pack donkey can carry roughly 100 to 150 pounds of cargo. A pack donkey also consumes grain and water every single day of its journey. If you send a caravan of 50 donkeys from southern Iraq to the mountains of Anatolia, a trek of 600 miles over rocky mountain passes, by the time the caravan arrives, the donkeys have eaten half the value of their cargo in food. And if you need 5 tons of raw copper ingots to outfit a new brigade of heavy infantry, you need a caravan of 80 donkeys, 30 armed guards, handlers, and months of grueling, dangerous transit through hostile territory. The math of overland transport was a hard, suffocating ceiling on the growth of civilization. Until someone looked south, down the meandering current of the Euphrates, toward the sparkling blue waters of the Persian Gulf. To understand the genius of the ancient mariners, you must understand a basic law of physics. Water is nature's ultimate friction reducer. On land, every pound of cargo fights against gravity and the rough surface of the earth. The hooves of your donkeys grind against gravel. The wooden runners of your sledges drag through sand and mud. Every mile demands a continuous, exhausting expenditure of biological energy. On water, buoyancy neutralizes gravity. Place a 500-pound copper ingot on the ground, and it takes 4 strong men straining with levers just to shift it an inch. Place that same 500-pound ingot into a well-designed wooden boat, and a single teenager with a wooden paddle can push it 10 miles downstream with minimal effort. The moment humans mastered the physics of flotation, the economic calculus of global trade transformed overnight. A single ocean-going cargo vessel, measuring 40 to 50 feet in length, could carry between 10 to 20 tons of heavy freight. To transport 20 tons of cargo across land in 2500 BCE, you would need a caravan of 300 donkeys, 50 handlers, and an armed escort capable of repelling raiders across hundreds of miles of lawless wilderness. On a boat, you needed a crew of 8 men and the wind. The wind was free. The water was the highway. And at the southern tip of Mesopotamia, where the Tigris and the Euphrates merge and empty into the Persian Gulf, humanity had access to one of the most incredible maritime corridors on planet Earth. Let us look at the ancient map of the Persian Gulf and the northern Arabian Sea in the mid-3rd millennium BCE. In Mesopotamian cuneiform royal inscriptions, 3 distant, mythical lands are constantly referenced as the primary sources of foreign wealth. First, Dilmun. Second, Magan. And third, Magan. For thousands of years, modern historians considered these names to be semi-legendary places, mythological paradises mentioned in Sumerian poetry alongside stories of the Great Flood and the hero Gilgamesh. In Sumerian mythology, Dilmun was described as a holy land where the lion did not kill, the wolf did not snatch the lamb, sickness did not touch the eyes, and no one grew old. It was described as a land blessed by the god Enki with sweet, bubbling freshwater springs in the middle of the sea. In the mid-20th century, a team of Danish archaeologists led by Geoffrey Bibby and P.D. Glob decided to test whether these mythical trading kingdoms had real physical locations. They began digging on the desert island of Bahrain, sitting in the Persian Gulf off the coast of Saudi Arabia, and at the nearby island of Failaka off Kuwait. What they uncovered stunned the academic world. Bahrain was Dilmun. Underneath the desert sands, Bibby's team discovered the massive, fortified stone city of Khalat al-Bahrain dating back to 2200 BCE. They found grand stone temples at Barber, monumental royal burial mounds numbering in the tens of thousands, and deep warehouses filled with goods from across the ancient world. And why did the Sumerians describe Bahrain as a holy land of freshwater in the middle of the sea? Because Bahrain possesses a unique geological phenomenon: freshwater artesian aquifers that bubble up naturally from the limestone bedrock, both on the island and even directly out of the seabed beneath the salt water of the Gulf. Ancient divers would swim down into the ocean with collapsed leather bags and fill them with sweet, drinkable water directly from the seafloor. To finance these colossal maritime expeditions, the merchants of Ur invented the world's first recorded maritime venture capital and joint stock investment contracts. The Taputum Partnership System. An individual merchant captain rarely had enough personal capital to buy a 40-foot ship, hire 8 skilled sailors, purchase 20 tons of barley and wool, and fund a 6-month voyage to Dilmun and Magan. The Taputum system allowed multiple investors to pool their capital. Wealthy temple administrators, royal palace officials, aristocratic noblewomen, and even small private citizens contributed silver shekels, jars of sesame oil, or bolts of woven linen to a common voyage fund. The contracts, inscribed on clay tablets and witnessed in the temple of the sun god Shamash, the divine guarantor of fair business contracts, laid out precise legal terms. The active seafaring merchant was entrusted with the capital. He sailed to Dilmun, traded the commodities for Magan copper and Indus carnelian, and sailed back to Ur. Upon return, the initial capital was repaid to the investors, and the net profits were divided according to pre-agreed ratios, typically 50-50 between the investors and the merchant captain. And the contracts included sophisticated risk management clauses. If the ship was attacked by pirates or wrecked in a catastrophic storm on the Persian Gulf, and the merchant captain could prove he acted without negligence, he was absolved from personal debt liability by swearing a solemn oath of innocence before the sacred symbols of Shamash. This was maritime limited liability insurance and private venture financing operating 4,000 years before the founding of Lloyd's of London or the Dutch East India Company. Dilmun was not a myth. Dilmun was the Hong Kong or the Singapore of the Bronze Age. It was the great maritime customs house, warehouse, and free trade port of the Persian Gulf. Merchants from Mesopotamia, Arabia, and India met in the bustling harbor of Bahrain to exchange goods under standardized weights and measures. Archaeologists found hundreds of distinctive circular steatite stamped seals, known today as Dilmun seals, carved with intricate depictions of bulls, gazelles, palm trees, and stylized human figures. These seals were the signatures, the trademarks, and the quality control stamps of Bronze Age international trade corporations. When a merchant in Ur purchased 20 bales of fine linen or 30 jars of sesame oil, he affixed his seal to a lump of wet clay pressed over the rope knot securing the cargo. That cargo was loaded onto a vessel at the port of Ur, sailed down the Gulf to Dilmun, and unloaded into international bonded warehouses without the seals ever being broken. Excavations at the Barber Temple complex in northern Bahrain by Danish archaeologists revealed the religious and economic heart of Dilmun. The temple consisted of 3 superimposed stone platforms built around a sacred, subterranean freshwater spring chamber. Worshippers descended a broad stone staircase to a sunken stone basin where sweet, cool artesian water welled up from the bedrock. Here, merchants and divers offered bronze statuettes, alabaster vessels, and polished marine shells to Enki and his consort Ninhursag, the divine protectors of sweet water and life. And Dilmun had another miraculous natural treasure that fueled its international wealth. The finest natural pearls in the ancient world. The warm, shallow, hypersaline waters around Bahrain were home to colossal beds of pearl oysters. During the summer months, local divers, fastened to heavy stone weights with fiber ropes, dove 30 feet into the Gulf on a single breath, prying oysters from the seabed with sharp bronze knives. These glowing, iridescent, fish eyes, as they were called in Sumerian cuneiform texts, were exported to the royal courts of Mesopotamia, where queens and princesses wore necklaces of Dilmun pearls as the ultimate symbol of purity and divine favor. Furthermore, Dilmun developed its own standardized system of stone weights, the Dilmun standard. A Dilmun unit of weight was approximately 13.7 grams, a standard that acted as a mathematical bridge between the Mesopotamian shekel and the Indus Valley weight system. Dilmun was the international currency exchange of antiquity, translating the weights, prices, and commodities of 3 continents into a harmonious system of global exchange. At the northern entrance to the Persian Gulf, on the island of Failaka off the coast of modern Kuwait, French and Danish archaeologists excavated an essential forward outpost of the Dilmun network. Failaka was known in ancient inscriptions as Agarum, the sacred seat of the god Inzak, the divine patron and protector of the Dilmun trade. Archaeologists discovered a monumental administrative palace and a grand stone temple dedicated to Inzak. Inside the palace rooms, they uncovered hundreds of round steatite stamped seals, cylinder seals showing a fusion of Mesopotamian and Indus motifs, and cuneiform administrative tablets recording the storage of grain, dates, bronze weapons, and luxury textiles imported from Sumer. Failaka was the maritime oasis where ocean-going ships entering from the open Gulf anchored to replenish their freshwater supplies, pay harbor customs duties, and wait for favorable tidal currents before navigating the winding, re-choked channels of the Shat al-Arab Delta to reach the inland ports of Uar and Eridu. Dilmun was the gateway. But Dilmun was only the middleman. To find the source of the heavy metals that forged the Bronze Age, the ships had to sail past Bahrain. They had to sail through the dangerous, shark-infested waters of the Strait of Hormuz, and turn south into the rugged, volcanic coastline of the Gulf of Oman. The most terrifying geographic crucible of the entire voyage was the passage through the Strait of Hormuz and the Musandam Peninsula. The Musandam Peninsula, known to ancient mariners as the Ruas al-Jibal, is a jagged, drowned mountain landscape where vertical limestone cliffs plunge thousands of feet directly into the dark ocean, forming a maze of deep, narrow sea fjords. Here, the waters of the shallow Persian Gulf squeeze through a narrow 30-mile choke point to meet the deep, surging swells of the Indian Ocean. The hydrodynamic collision of tidal currents creates violent, unpredictable whirlpools, treacherous standing waves, and sudden, blinding dust squalls known as the shamal, a fierce northwesterly gale that screams off the Arabian desert without warning, turning calm blue waters into a chaotic frenzy of white foam. To navigate through the Strait of Hormuz, Bronze Age captains had to wait for days in natural rock coves, watching the tides. They sent lookout scouts to the highest cliffs to watch for changes in watercolor and surface ripples that signaled underwater reefs. They timed their passage to catch the outgoing ebb tide, riding the current through the narrow straits under bare poles before the incoming flood tide could drag their fragile, stitched wooden hulls against the jagged rock faces of the peninsula. They were sailing to Magan. In cuneiform economic texts from the Akkadian Empire, around 2300 BC, the great king Sargon of Akkad leaves a famous royal inscription that captures the staggering scale of international maritime trade. Sargon, king of the world, triumphant in 34 battles, he conquered the cities from the upper sea to the lower sea. At the wars of Agade, he caused to dock the ships of Meluha, the ships of Magan, and the ships of Dilmun. Look at that phrase. The ships of Magan. What was Magan? Archaeological expeditions in the Sultanate of Oman and the United Arab Emirates over the past 4 decades, led by German, French, and Italian teams at sites like Massar, Hilly, Bat, and Mnar, have confirmed beyond a shadow of a doubt that the ancient land of Magan encompassed the Al-Hajar mountain range and the coastal plains of modern Oman and the UAE. The Al-Hajar Mountains are a geological anomaly known as the Seamale Ophiolite Complex, a massive slab of the Earth's oceanic crust and upper mantle that was thrust upward onto the Arabian continental plate by tectonic collisions millions of years ago. And that exposed mantle is saturated with immense, hyper-rich veins of copper, or chalcopyrite, bornite, and malachite. In the Bronze Age, Magan was the copper foundry of the Western world. Archaeologists surveying the desert wadis of Oman have identified hundreds of Bronze Age mining and smelting sites dating between 2500 BCE and 1800 BCE. At the site of Massar I in the interior of Oman, German metallurgists led by Gerd Weisgerber excavated an entire Bronze Age industrial settlement. Imagine the industrial landscape of Magan 4,000 years ago. You are walking through a dry, sun-blasted canyon in the Al-Hajar Mountains. The heat is suffocating, over 115 degrees Fahrenheit in the summer sun. All around you, the mountain slopes are scarred with deep open-pit copper mines. Men wielding heavy diorite hammerstones and bronze picks are hacking out chunks of green-veined malachite ore from the rock faces. In the valley floor below, dozens of clay smelting furnaces are roaring day and night. The furnaces are constructed of cylindrical clay walls lined with crushed slag. They are fueled by charcoal made from slow-burning desert acacia and prosopis trees. Teams of laborers work foot bellows made of goat skins, pumping continuous blasts of oxygen into the bottom of the furnaces through clay tuyères until the temperature inside exceeds 1085 degrees Celsius, the melting point of pure copper. The air is thick with acrid sulfur dioxide smoke and the smell of roasting stone. When the slag is tapped and the glowing, molten metal is poured into sand molds, it cools into heavy, standardized copper ingots shaped like circular, bun ingots, or flat planoconvex slabs weighing between 2 to 4 kilograms each. In ancient Sumer, copper was called Urudu. And in the tax ledgers and temple accounts of the city of Ur, scribes recorded receipts for single shipments of Magan copper arriving in the harbor that weighed 18,000 kilograms, over 18 metric tons of solid metal in a single fleet. 18 tons of copper. Think about the human labor represented by 18 tons of smelted metal. To produce 18 tons of finished copper required the mining of hundreds of tons of raw ore, the burning of entire forests of acacia wood for charcoal, the labor of thousands of miners and smelters, and the transport of those heavy metal buns across the desert to the coastal ports on the backs of donkeys and humans. Archaeological excavations at the island of Mnar off the coast of Abu Dhabi revealed that Magan was not a primitive mining hinterland, but a sophisticated coastal civilization. Mnar was an island trading metropolis characterized by monumental circular stone tombs built of finely dressed white limestone blocks, decorated with carved relief images of oryx, camels, and bulls. The inhabitants of Mnar practiced a mixed economy of intensive copper smelting and deep-sea marine exploitation. Excavators recovered thousands of bronze fishhooks, harpoon heads, and netting weights, alongside the bones of dugongs, green sea turtles, and pelagic fish such as tuna, barracuda, and sharks. The people of Magan were master fishermen and marine navigators, who had developed deep traditional knowledge of the coastal waters, treacherous tidal currents, and hidden coral banks of the Gulf of Oman long before the first Sumerian merchants arrived at their shores. And why was Magan producing this titanic volume of copper? Because of an alloy that defined human history. Bronze. Copper on its own is a relatively soft, malleable metal. You can make ornamental bowls, pins, and mirrors out of pure copper, but a sword or an axe made of pure copper bends and dulls the moment it strikes bone or armor. Around 3000 BC, ancient metallurgists discovered the miracle of alloying. If you take roughly 90% molten copper, and you mix in roughly 10% of another rare metal, tin, the resulting alloy is not just a little harder than copper. It is drastically harder. Bronze can hold a razor-sharp cutting edge. It can withstand violent impacts without shattering. It can be cast into intricate, lethal weapon designs, socketed spearheads, heavy battle axes, bladed daggers, and body armor. The strategic value of Magan copper was so immense that it provoked the world's first documented international resource wars. Around 2250 BCE, King Naram-Sin of Akkad, the grandson of Sargon the Great, launched a colossal amphibious military invasion of the Gulf of Oman. In royal victory inscriptions carved onto stone steely discovered at Susa, Naram-Sin boasts of his conquest. Naram-Sin the Mighty, king of the four quarters of the world, he campaigned against Magan and captured Mandanu, the king of Magan, in the midst of his mountains, and from his mountains he quarried diorite stone and transported it to his city of Agade. Diorite was a hard, dark gray igneous rock that was virtually indestructible. Because southern Mesopotamia had no stone, Mesopotamian kings prized Magan diorite above all other materials for monumental royal statues. When Gudea, the famous ruler of the Sumerian city-state of Lagash, built the great temple of Ningirsu, he sent a fleet to the mountains of Magan to quarry colossal blocks of diorite. Royal artisans carved dozens of life-size statues of Gudea seated with hands clasped in pious prayer, with long cuneiform inscriptions carved across his robes recording. From Magan, diorite stone was brought, and Gudea caused a statue of himself to be fashioned from it. To his god Ningirsu, he dedicated it. Those diorite statues of Gudea, today preserved in the Louvre Museum in Paris, are so hard that 5,000 years of burial in the damp mud of a rock could not erode the sharp edges of the cuneiform script. They stand as eternal monuments to the stone and copper fleets of the Persian Gulf. Bronze transformed warfare from a chaotic skirmish of wooden clubs into an organized, lethal state enterprise. An army equipped with bronze weapons could slaughter an army equipped with stone and flint in 30 minutes. The kingdom that controlled the copper and the tin controlled the world. And so, the kings of Mesopotamia, Sargon of Akkad, Naram-Sin, Gudea of Lagash, and the kings of the third dynasty of Uar were locked in an existential race to secure their maritime supply lines to the copper mountains of Magan. If the ships of Magan stopped sailing, your foundries went cold. If your foundries went cold, your army had no bronze. If your army had no bronze, your city was burned to the ground by your rivals. If Dilmun was the trading post and Magan was the copper mine, what was Meluhha? To the Mesopotamians, Meluhha was the most distant, exotic, and awe-inspiring realm in the known universe. In Sumerian texts, Meluhha was called the Black Land, a reference to both the dark skin of its inhabitants and the rich, dark alluvial soil of its river valley. Cuneiform tablets describe the ships of Meluhha arriving in the ports of southern Iraq carrying luxuries that sounded like pure magic to the people of the Near East. Carnelian, translucent, blood-red quartz beads etched with white alkali patterns using advanced chemical techniques. Lapis lazuli and turquoise. Gold and ivory. Teakwood and ebony that did not rot in water. Exotic animals, peacocks, hunting dogs, and water buffaloes. For millennia, the location of Meluhha remained one of the great lost mysteries of history. Then, in the 1920s, British and Indian archaeologists began excavating large, mysterious mounds along the banks of the dry Indus River basin in modern Pakistan and northwestern India. What they uncovered was not just a kingdom. It was the largest, most technologically sophisticated urban civilization of the entire Bronze Age. The Indus Valley Civilization, the Harappans. The scale of the Indus Valley Civilization dwarfs both ancient Egypt and ancient Mesopotamia combined. It encompassed over 500,000 square miles, an area larger than modern France and Germany combined, stretching from the foothills of the Himalayas to the Arabian Sea. Cities like Harappa, Mohenjo-Daro, and Dhalavira housed tens of thousands of people in massive, multi-storied brick mansions. Unlike the chaotic, winding alleyways of Mesopotamian cities, Indus cities were engineered with staggering mathematical precision. They were built on rectangular grid systems oriented to the cardinal points of the compass. Every single brick used in every single city across 500,000 square miles was manufactured in a standardized mathematical ratio of 4 to 2 to 1, a level of industrial standardization that modern construction companies would envy. And their public health engineering was 3,000 years ahead of its time. Almost every private home in Mohenjo-Daro had its own indoor bathroom lined with waterproof fired brick. Waste was flushed away through terracotta pipes into covered municipal sewer systems beneath the paved streets, running to covered drainage cesspools outside the city walls. And the Harappans were not just architects. They were the greatest maritime trading civilization of the ancient world. In 1954, on the Gulf of Khumbat in the Indian state of Gujarat, Indian archaeologist S.R. Rao excavated an ancient Harappan settlement called Lothal. At Lothal, Rao discovered a monumental, rectangular basin built of kiln-fired mud brick, measuring over 220 meters long and 37 meters wide. The walls were lined with waterproof gypsum plaster. A complex system of sluice gates and inlet channels connected the basin to the tidal flow of the ancient Sabarmati River. Lothal was the world's first known engineered tidal dry dock. High tide would flood the basin, allowing massive ocean-going cargo ships to enter directly from the Arabian Sea. The sluice gates were then closed, trapping the water and allowing the vessels to remain afloat while dock workers unloaded tons of raw materials and loaded manufactured luxury goods onto the wharves. Next to the dockyard was a massive warehouse complex covering nearly 2,000 square meters, sitting on a raised brick platform to protect international cargo from monsoonal floods. Inside the warehouse, archaeologists found hundreds of clay ceilings with impressions of Harappan stamped seals showing the famous unicorn, elephants, and rhinoceroses, alongside traces of woven cloth, cordage, and bitumen. At the industrial settlement of Shanidaro in Sindh, excavated by American archaeologist Ernest Mackay, archaeologists uncovered an entire manufacturing quarter dedicated to mass-producing luxury export goods for the Mesopotamian market. Mackay found hundreds of specialized ceramic kilns, thousands of raw quartz nodules, and specialized lapidary workbenches littered with discarded debitage flakes. Harappan artisans spent weeks heating raw carnelian stones in ceramic crucibles buried in glowing charcoal trenches. The heat treatment altered the chemical state of iron oxides within the quartz matrix, transforming dull, brownish chalcedony into rich, radiant, blood-red carnelian. And to protect their maritime shipping lanes from piracy and rival seafaring clans, the Indus Valley civilization constructed heavily fortified naval outposts along the barren, rocky Makran coast of southwestern Pakistan. The most famous of these naval fortresses was Sukhajan-Dor, located near the Iranian border. Sukhajan-Dor sat on a natural rocky bluff overlooking the Gwashki River Valley, barely 20 miles from the Arabian Sea. The Harappans surrounded the settlement with a massive defensive wall of rough stone masonry and mud brick, measuring over 7 meters thick at the base. Sukhajan-Dor was an armed naval garrison and fortified provisioning station that controlled the maritime choke point between the Indus River Delta and the entrance to the Persian Gulf, providing armed escorts, fresh water, and repair facilities for the ships of Maluha as they made their perilous voyage toward Oman and Bahrain. The Harappans were manufacturing goods specifically designed for export to Mesopotamia. They set up specialized industrial colonies thousands of miles away from their homeland. In northern Afghanistan, at a site called Shorchagai, the Harappans established a permanent trading outpost right next to the world's richest lapis lazuli mines in the Badakhshan Mountains, cutting out all middlemen and controlling the supply chain from the mine directly to the port at Lothal. At Lothal and other Indus coastal sites, master craftsmen operated bead factories. They took raw carnelian stones, heated them in ceramic kilns for weeks to darken their red color, and used diamond-tipped microdrills to drill microscopic holes through beads up to 8 centimeters long, holes so precise that modern jewelers struggle to replicate them without motorized lasers. The precision of Harappan craft exports reached its absolute zenith in the chemical engineering of alkaline etching. To create the white geometric patterns on red carnelian beads, Indus artisans ground the seeds of the wild mustard plant and mixed them with a thick paste of natural washing soda extracted from plant ashes. Using fine bone pens, they drew concentric circles, cross-hatching, and trefoil clover patterns across the polished surface of the red bead. When the bead was fired in a reduction kiln at over 350 degrees Celsius, the alkaline paste reacted chemically with the quartz silica, causing the surface to fuse into a permanent, milky white layer of calcium silicate enstatite that penetrated deep into the crystalline structure of the stone. These beads were virtually indestructible, acid-proof, scratch-proof, and waterproof. When French archaeologists excavated the royal palace of Mari on the Middle Euphrates River in Syria, Over 1,500 miles from the Indus Valley, they discovered the treasure of Ur inside a terracotta jar buried beneath the palace floor. Among the gold vessels and lapis lazuli pendants was a necklace composed of 30 long, etched carnelian beads manufactured in the workshops of Gujarat, each bead bearing the identical trefoil and eye motifs of the Harapan craftsmen. The presence of Indus beads in the royal archives of Syria proves that the maritime network of the Arabian Sea was not an isolated regional exchange. It was a continental conveyor belt that linked South Asian industrial workshops directly to the royal courts of the Mediterranean world. These long, etched carnelian beads were the luxury status symbol of the ancient world. When Sir Leonard Woolley excavated the Royal Cemetery of Ur between 1922 and 1934, the artifacts recovered from the Great Death Pits stunned the world with their technological mastery and global provenance. In the tomb of King Mescalandug, Woolley uncovered a ceremonial helmet beaten from a single sheet of 15-karat gold, sculpted in high relief to depict the king's braided hair, ears, and coiled bun with microscopic realism. Next to the king was a double-edged dagger with a solid gold blade and a handle carved from a single, flawless piece of dark blue Afghan lapis lazuli, fitted with gold studs. In the tomb of Queen Pwabi, Woolley discovered dozens of royal courtiers, female musicians, and palace soldiers who had willingly taken poison to accompany their queen into the afterlife. At the queen's feet lay the silver lyre and the golden lyre, instruments adorned with cast bull heads of gold, silver, and Magan copper, their eyes inlaid with shell from the Persian Gulf and lapis lazuli from Badakhshan, while their sound boxes were framed with mosaic borders of red Indus carnelian. Every single royal artifact in the cemetery was an international masterpiece. South Asian stone, Central Asian gems, Arabian copper, and Mesopotamian craftsmanship united in the service of royal immortality. When the Royal Cemetery of Ur was excavated in the 1920s by Sir Leonard Woolley, he opened the tomb of Queen Pwabi, dating to roughly 2600 BCE. Draped across the queen's skeletal remains was a breathtaking cape woven from thousands of lapis lazuli beads and dozens of etched red carnelian beads. Chemical and microtrace analysis proved that those beads were manufactured 2,000 miles away in the bead workshops of Gujarat and carried across the Arabian Sea in the hold of an Indus ship. Think about what this means. In 2500 BCE, humanity had already established a globalized maritime trade network stretching from the mountains of Afghanistan, down through the ports of India, across the Arabian Sea to Oman, through the Persian Gulf to Bahrain, and up the Tigris and Euphrates rivers into the heart of Iraq. It was an international economy. At the great Harapan metropolis of Mohenjo-Daro, the scale of urban sanitation and civic organization was inextricably linked to maritime trade. The city possessed an estimated 40,000 inhabitants, supported by a sophisticated agrarian hinterland and an internal network of paved river quays along the Indus River. The standardized steatite seals used by Harapan merchants to stamp trade goods were engraved with microscopic precision using hardened bronze burins. Each seal depicted a sacred animal, the unicorn, the zebu bull, the elephant, or the tiger, surmounted by a line of the undeciphered Indus script. When an Indus merchant in Lodhel prepared a consignment of cotton textiles or carnelian beads for export to Mesopotamia, He pressed his stamped seal into wet clay bully wrapped around the binding ropes of the cargo bales. These seal impressions, recovered from excavations at Susa in Iran and Uar in Iraq, served as international bills of lading, guaranteeing the integrity, origin, and ownership of the cargo across 2,000 miles of ocean transit, and connecting that economy were the ships. How did ancient humans build ships capable of surviving 2,000-mile voyages across the open Indian Ocean without a single iron nail or steel bolt? For decades, maritime historians had almost no physical evidence. Would an organic fiber rot in warm seawater? Shipwrecks in the shallow, oxygen-rich waters of the Persian Gulf are consumed by marine boring worms within centuries. The ships of Magan and Maluha were ghost ships, known only through texts and drawings. Until the late 1970s and 1980s, when a brilliant Italian-French archaeological mission led by Serge Cloziot and Maurizio Tosi began excavating coastal sites in Oman, specifically at Ras Al Jins and Ras Al Had on the easternmost tip of the Arabian Peninsula. At Ras Al Jins, in a coastal settlement dating to 2300 BC, the archaeologists discovered something miraculous. Hundreds of preserved slabs of black bitumen. When they turned the bitumen slabs over, the undersides preserved flawless, petrified impressions of the ship materials to which they had once been attached. They saw the impressions of thick bundles of giant reeds, palm fibers, wooden planks, and parallel ropes twisted with mathematical precision. Embedded in the bitumen were the encrusted shells of barnacles, marine organisms that only attach to ships that have spent months continuously sailing in the deep ocean. And when geochemical spectrographic analysis was run on the bitumen, the sulfur isotope fingerprint revealed that the bitumen did not come from Oman. It came from Hit, a famous natural petroleum seep on the Euphrates River in central Iraq, over 1,000 miles to the north. Here was the physical proof of the global shipyard. Mesopotamian petroleum was being shipped down the Persian Gulf to Oman to caulk in waterproof ships built with Indian teakwood and local reeds, which were then sailed across the Arabian Sea to India. Let us reconstruct the architecture of these Bronze Age vessels based on the Ras Al Jin's discoveries and experimental archaeology. There were two primary types of ocean-going cargo vessels operating in the network. First, the reed bundle vessel. These were massive adaptations of the traditional river boats of the Mesopotamian marshes. Huge bundles of dried giant reeds were tied together with thick palm fiber ropes into a rigid, double-ended hull with high, curved prows and sterns designed to slice through ocean swells. The entire exterior of the reed hull was coated with a thick, hot layer of bitumen mixed with animal fat and crushed calcite to form an impenetrable, flexible waterproof skin. A famous experimental reconstruction of this type of vessel, the Magan boat, built by archaeologists in Oman in 2005, measured 12 meters in length and was capable of carrying over 12 tons of cargo and a crew of 8 sailors across the Gulf of Oman. Second, the stitched plank wooden vessel. These were the heavy-duty freighters of the Meliahan and Magan merchants. Instead of reeds, the hull was built from thick wooden planks of Indian teak or wild acacia. But because the ancients had no iron nails, they used a shipbuilding technique that survived in the Indian Ocean for thousands of years: sewn plank construction. Carpenters drilled thousands of small holes along the edges of each wooden plank. They laid the planks edge to edge over a central keel. Then, using thick, oiled cords made from coconut husk fiber or palm fiber, they literally stitched the planks together, pulling the cords with immense leverage until the wood was clamped under crushing tension. Between the planks, they placed a layer of crushed moss, reeds, and animal fat. Then, the entire hull inside and out was sealed with bitumen and fish oil. A stitched plank boat has a miraculous engineering property. It is flexible. A modern steel or nailed wood ship is rigid. When a rigid ship hits a violent ocean swell or grazes a coral reef, the structural stress concentrates on the metal fasteners, causing rivets to shear and planks to crack. A stitched plank boat flexes with the ocean. It twists and bends over the crest of a 20-foot wave like a living creature, absorbing the kinetic energy of the sea. And how did the captains navigate these vessels across 1,000 miles of open water without a compass? They navigated by reading the universe. By day, they read the color of the water. Deep indigo meant you were over the abyssal plains of the ocean. Pale green meant you were approaching the shallow continental shelf. They read the flight of sea birds. They kept cages of land-finding birds, crows and doves, on board the ships. When the captain suspected they were near land, he released a bird. If the bird flew off in a straight line, the ship followed it toward the coast. If the bird circled and returned to the mast, they knew they were still in the open sea. By night, they navigated by the stars. The ancient mariners did not just glance at the night sky. They possessed a mental map of the celestial sphere that was as precise as a modern GPS coordinate grid. They tracked the altitude of the North Star, Polaris, above the horizon using their fingers held at arm's length. They memorized the rising and setting points of specific stars, Aldebaran, Sirius, and the constellation of Orion. And above all, they mastered the greatest natural engine in the Indian Ocean: the monsoons. The word monsoon comes from the Arabic mawsim, meaning season. Between May and September, the intense summer heat over the Asian landmass creates a massive low-pressure system that sucks wind northeast from Africa and Arabia straight across the ocean toward India, the southwest monsoon. Between November and March, the pattern reverses. The cooling of the continent pushes steady, dry winds southwest from India back toward Arabia and the Persian Gulf, the northeast monsoon. The ancient mariners of Magan and Meluhha understood this planetary clockwork. You did not fight the ocean. You surrendered to its rhythm. In the summer, you loaded your ship at the port of Uar or the wharves of Oman, raised your woven linen sail, and let the southwest monsoon carry you smoothly across the Arabian Sea to the docks of Lathal in India in 3 weeks. You spent the autumn months in the bustling markets of Gujarat, trading your copper, bitumen, and wool for carnelian beads, ivory, and timber. And when the winter wind shifted, you caught the northeast monsoon and sailed effortlessly back across the ocean to the mouth of the Euphrates. The experimental reconstruction of the Magan boat in 2005 at the Sultan Qaboos University in Oman provided critical empirical insights into the hydrodynamics of Bronze Age reed seafaring. The vessel was constructed using 36 tons of local reeds, 3 tons of date palm rope, and 2 tons of bitumen imported from Iraq. Sea trials in the Gulf of Oman demonstrated that the bitumen-coated reed hull possessed exceptional buoyancy and stability in heavy ocean swells. The high, curved prow sliced effortlessly through oncoming waves, while the flexible reed structure absorbed the kinetic shocks of the sea without structural fatigue. The square linen sail, mounted on a bipod wooden mast, allowed the vessel to achieve sailing speeds of up to 5 knots when running before the seasonal monsoon winds, proving that ancient mariners could cross the Arabian Sea in less than 3 weeks of continuous navigation. The archaeological discoveries at Ras Al Jins revealed that maritime ship maintenance in the Bronze Age was a highly organized communal science. In Building 7 at Site RJ2, Maurizio Tosi and Serge Clouseau uncovered specialized toolkits used by shipwrights: bronze adzes, flint awls for piercing leather, polished bone needles used for repairing heavy linen sails, and large stone pestles stained with red ochre and crushed charcoal used for mixing bitumen coatings. Look at the extraordinary engineering of the coconut coir stitching ropes. Coconut fiber is one of the very few natural plant fibers that is completely immune to rotting in salt water. In fact, immersion in sea water actually strengthens core fibers, causing them to swell slightly and lock more tightly into the drilled holes of the teak planks. To stitch a 40-foot wooden hull required over 3 miles of hand-twisted 3-ply core cordage. The shipwrights threaded the oiled cords through the parallel holes, using heavy wooden levers and Spanish windlasses to exert thousands of pounds of mechanical tension, clamping the planks so tightly against the internal cedar ribs that water could not penetrate even before the application of bitumen caulking. And when a vessel returned from a long voyage across the Indian Ocean, it was beached on the sandy spit of Ras Al Jins. The crew scraped away the old, barnacle-encrusted bitumen with bronze scrapers, boiled fresh bitumen in ceramic pots over acacia wood fires, and reapplied a fresh, boiling hot protective skin to the hull, ensuring the ship was ready for its next crossing. It was an automated global conveyor belt powered by the heat of the sun. For nearly 800 years, from roughly 2600 BC to 1800 BC, the maritime network of the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Sea operated as the economic engine of human civilization. It connected 3 distinct worlds: Mesopotamia, the empire of writing, bureaucracy, and grain; Magan, the foundry of copper and bronze; Meluhha, the titan of urban planning, precision craftsmanship, and cotton. Through this liquid corridor flowed not just metal and stone, but human beings, ideas, religious concepts, and artistic motifs. Indus stamped seals have been excavated in the residential neighborhoods of Ur, Kish, and Nippur in Iraq. In fact, cuneiform legal records from the 3rd dynasty of Ur explicitly mention a neighborhood in southern Mesopotamia populated by settled Melian merchants, who had their own official translator, a man named Shuilishu, the Meluhha interpreter. Imagine that man, Shuilishu. For 1,200 years ago, in a world where 99% of humans never traveled 5 miles from their birthplace, Shuilishu was bilingual in Sumerian and the lost, undeciphered language of the Indus Valley. He sat in the customs offices of Ur, translating shipping manifests, mediating business disputes, and drafting contracts between merchants who were born 2,000 miles apart. It was the dawn of a truly globalized world. And then, the network died. Around 1900 BCE, the archaeological record reveals a sudden, catastrophic disruption across the Indian Ocean network. In Mesopotamia, references to the ships of Meluhha began to vanish from cuneiform texts. Then, mentions of Magan copper disappear. Within 2 centuries, the only trade partner left in the Gulf is Dilmun, and even Dilmun is trading only small, pathetic scraps of low-grade metal. What happened? In the Indus Valley, a massive shift in global climate patterns began to weaken the summer monsoon rains, the 4.2 kiloyear event. The Great Gagar-Hakra River system, the agricultural lifeblood of dozens of Harappan cities, began to dry up. At the same time, catastrophic tectonic shifts may have altered the course of the Indus River, causing devastating, uncontrollable floods that submerged the port of Lodh in mud. The great Indus cities began to depopulate. The monumental brick houses were abandoned. The municipal sewer systems clogged with silt. The bead workshops went cold. The standardized script was forgotten. And alongside the climatic disruptions in the Indus Valley, southern Mesopotamia was confronting an invisible, man-made ecological catastrophe. Soil salinization. For over 1,000 years, the Sumerians had practiced intensive, continuous canal irrigation in a flat, poorly drained floodplain under a scorching desert sun. As millions of gallons of river water evaporated from the fields, microscopic quantities of dissolved mineral salts were left behind in the topsoil. Without adequate underground drainage, the subterranean water table rose, bringing toxic salts directly to the root zone of the crops. In the early 3rd millennium BC, Sumerian temple records indicate that wheat and barley were grown in roughly equal proportions. By 2100 BC, wheat, which is highly sensitive to salt, had completely vanished from southern Mesopotamian agriculture, replaced entirely by salt-tolerant barley. By 1800 BC, average crop yields had plummeted by over 60%, leaving the once fertile soil covered in a barren, white crust of salt. The ecological foundation of the great Sumerian city-states had burned out. The economic and political center of gravity shifted inexorably north to the fresh soils of Babylon and Assyria, sealing the fate of the southern maritime ports. The Indus Valley civilization did not fall to foreign invaders. It evaporated into the countryside as its ecological foundation collapsed. And when the Indus cities died, the global supply chain snapped. Magan no longer had a market for its surplus copper. The warehouses of Dilmun emptied, and Mesopotamia was suddenly cut off from its maritime lifeline of metal and luxury. The linguistic and cultural interchange facilitated by the Persian Gulf trade network left indelible marks on ancient Near Eastern civilization. In Sumerian cuneiform economic documents, foreign loanwords borrowed from the Dravidian or ancestral languages of Meluhha began appearing in administrative texts. Words for exotic luxury goods, such as abieh, dar, and shin. The maritime trade created the world's first multi-ethnic cosmopolitan trading enclaves in southern Mesopotamia. Meliahan merchants settled permanently in the suburbs of Ur and Lagash, intermarrying with local Sumerian families, adopting cuneiform names, and serving as royal commercial liaisons while maintaining their traditional religious customs and dietary practices. This ancient globalized community proved that the waters of the ocean did not divide humanity. They served as the great liquid bridge that united diverse cultures into a shared economic destiny. To see the vivid, humorous, and deeply human reality of this ancient maritime trade, one only has to look at the private archive of a single Bronze Age merchant discovered in the ruins of the city of Ur. Nasir. In the 1920s, Sir Leonard Woolley excavated House No. 1, Old Street, in the wealthy residential quarter of Ur. The house belonged to Nasir, a prominent member of the Alec Tilmun, the prestigious guild of seafaring merchants who traded directly with Dilmun and Magan. In the courtyard of Nasir's house, Woolley found dozens of baked cuneiform clay tablets. They were not dry temple accounts. They were angry customer complaint letters sent to Nasir by frustrated business partners from across Mesopotamia. The most famous of these tablets, now housed in the British Museum, is a scathing letter from a wealthy client named Nani, dating to roughly 1750 BCE. Nani writes in fury, "Tell Nasir, Nani sends the following message. When you came, you said to me as follows, I will give Gimmelson fine quality copper ingots. You left then, but you did not do what you promised me. You put ingots which were not good before my messenger and said, if you want to take them, take them. If you do not want to take them, go away. What do you take me for, that you treat someone like me with such contempt? I have sent as messengers gentlemen like ourselves to collect the bag with my money, but you have treated me with contempt by sending them back to me empty-handed several times, and that through enemy territory. Is there anyone among the merchants who trade with Telmun who has treated me in this way? You alone treat my messenger with contempt. Take notice that from now on I will not accept here any copper from you that is not of fine quality. I shall select and take the ingots individually in my own yard, and I shall exercise against you my right of rejection because you have treated me with contempt." Another tablet in the house, from a customer named Arbitrum, complains, "Why have you not sent me the copper? If you do not give it, I will curse you." Nasir kept all these angry letters stacked in a room in his house, while continuing to import tons of copper from the Persian Gulf. It is the oldest recorded customer service complaint in human history, proving that 4,000 years ago, international supply chains were fraught with the exact same commercial disputes, quality control arguments, and merchant drama that define global business today. The waters of the Persian Gulf grew quiet. The ghost ships disintegrated into the silt. The first great maritime age of humanity was over. Civilization had learned a painful, timeless lesson. Connection brings immense wealth, but connection also brings catastrophic vulnerability. When one node in a global network falls, the shockwaves ripple across the entire planet. With the southern sea routes closed, the great empires of the Mediterranean and the Near East were forced to look elsewhere for their survival. They turned their gaze toward the north. They looked toward the dark, primeval forests of ancient Europe. They were about to follow a trail of golden fossilized tree resin that washed ashore on the freezing beaches of the Baltic Sea, a stone that ancient people believed was solidified sunlight. Amber. Next time, on Season 1 of the Grand Narrative. We leave the Arabian Sea behind and journey north into the dark, freezing forests of ancient Europe. Episode 3: The Amber Road. We will follow a trail of glowing, static-charged fossilized tree resin across 2,000 miles of European river highways. We will discover how Baltic amber ended up in the golden tomb of King Tutankhamun and the shaft graves of Mycenae, and explore the clash between the barbarian warrior aristocracies of the north and the sun-drenched pharaohs of the Mediterranean. Join us for Episode 3, The Amber Road. I am your host. Thank you for listening to the Grand Narrative. The engineering principles pioneered by the Bronze Age mariners of Magan and Maluha did not vanish when their cities collapsed. They became the foundational DNA of Indian Ocean seafaring for the next 4,000 years. The stitch plank construction technique was preserved and perfected across generations of Arab, Persian, and Indian shipwrights, evolving directly into the legendary ocean-going dhows, the boom, the bagla, the sambuk, and the ganja. These sewn-plank wooden dhows, constructed without a single iron nail, carried the medieval spice trade between Arabia, India, and China, sailed the voyages of the legendary Sinbad the Sailor, and transported Arab merchants to the coast of East Africa to found the Swahili trading city-states of Kilwa and Zanzibar. When Portuguese explorer Vasco da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope and entered the Indian Ocean in 1498, he was astonished to encounter massive sewn-plank Arab vessels crossing the Arabian Sea guided by astronomical star charts and navigating by the seasonal monsoon winds, the exact same maritime highway that had been conquered by the ships of Magan and Maluha 4 millennia earlier. When we look out at the modern supertankers and container megaships crossing the Strait of Hormuz today, carrying millions of barrels of crude oil to the industrial ports of Asia and Europe, we are looking at the exact same geographical corridor, driven by the exact same human hunger for raw energy and material wealth. The bitumen-coated reed boats of Magan have been replaced by 200,000-ton steel hulls, the linen sails by two-stroke marine diesel engines, and the cuneiform clay tablets by satellite-linked digital freight manifests. Yet the fundamental human drama remains unchanged. We are still a species that refuses to accept the physical limits of our native shores. We are still the daring sailors of the Bronze Age, venturing out into the dark, uncharted waters of the open ocean, gambling our lives upon the waves to stitch the continents into one continuous human story. The sea does not remember the names of the thousands of anonymous Bronze Age mariners who drowned in its depths, whose bones dissolved in the cold silt of the Arabian Sea 4,000 years ago. Yet every modern global trade network, every undersea fiber optic cable, and every international container port owes its existence to the courage of those forgotten ancient crews who dared to look past the horizon.